We have to stop meeting like this. Thank you guys so much for being here for another episode of Spooky Scary Storytime. Today's theme is 6 stories that I think will keep you up at night because these stories definitely scared me. 2 are brand new, others I've told on short form platforms before, but they've never been included in a compilation. We've got stories from Alaska, from Utah, from Big Bear in the mountains, and I really hope you enjoy. If you're new here, Spooky Scary Storytime is my series where I share allegedly true listener submitted stories that come to me through my website dogoodstaybad.com. We'll get right to it. Please enjoy. This is an allegedly true paranormal story time about an imaginary friend of someone's husband who was jealous of her when they started dating. I had an imaginary friend when I was growing up. Her name was Charlene. Luckily, have not seen her as an adult, but this woman named Christy wrote in, and she says that when she started dating her husband, he was in the military and he was deployed overseas, but she moved into his house. He was still going to be gone for a couple of months after she moved in, which meant she was going to be there for a little while by herself. And after she moved in, she had this kind of just creeped out feeling in the house, although she didn't experience anything directly. It was just this overwhelming sense of feeling watched, especially when she was in the bedroom upstairs. But Christy didn't want to say anything to her man about it when they talked. They had other more important things to talk about it. He was still overseas, and she just attributed it to being in this new house by herself. They were also very early on in their relationship, so she didn't want to say anything that would make him think that she was crazy. But he gets back from deployment, and then she starts having these creepy nightmares. These nightmares would almost start as sleep paralysis, where she would feel like she woke up in bed, turn her head to look, and next to the bed would be a little girl standing that was very pale with short, dark hair. And she looked normal at first, but always in these dreams, this girl would end up lunging at Christy, and she had these jagged, sharp teeth. She said she had this nightmare about once a week, and she didn't know why, because she didn't know anybody in real life that looked like this little girl. She didn't like horror movies and didn't watch them. And she didn't think she was dreaming of herself as a child because she didn't look like that. But eventually she would have this dream so much that it started to visibly move her. And her husband would wake her up and say, "You're crying, you're moaning in your sleep. What is going on?" After one of these dreams, when he woke her up, she was so horrified that she decided she had to tell him. So the next day when they were out of the house, she said she didn't want to bring it up in the house because she didn't want to feed this thing any energy in case it was something real. She just asked him like, "Hey, have you ever had anything strange happen in the house? Because I feel watched. I've had these horrible nightmares and I don't know what's going on." And they get to talking, and he tells her that he's actually lived in some older turn-of-the-century houses growing up, but that he hadn't had anything super creepy happen in the house that they were living in now. She starts asking him about the houses that he grew up in, and did he ever have any experience with ghosts or spirits? And he says no, but I actually did have an imaginary friend, and this piqued her interest. She thought it was cute, and she was like, "Oh, what was your imaginary friend like?" And he was like, "Oh, she was this little girl. She was pale. She had short, dark hair, and she had jagged teeth." Christy said when he said that, she felt like crying because she knew this was the little girl in her dreams, and she's pressing him for more details, and he said, "No, she wasn't scary. We just played together in my dad's house that I grew up in." He says, "You know, it was just typical imaginary friend. We played together, but as I got older, she just kind of faded away." So Christy tells him, "I think I'm dreaming of her." And he says, no, it's got to be just the stress from your job or seasonal depression. Something is going on. You're not dreaming about my imaginary friend. So Christy agrees. She's like, "You're probably right." But then the paranormal activity around their house started. She said things would go missing, keys would show up in weird places, doors would randomly open and close on their own. Another thing they noticed happening in their house at this time was their perishables would rot within a few days. She would buy unripe, like bananas and produce, and within 2 days they would be black and moldy. Her husband was insistent that nothing paranormal was going on, but one night they were asleep and he woke her up and he said, "Christy, do you see that?" He motions to the dresser and she looks, and they see things being moved around almost by an invisible force. There was no one around to do it. As they're watching these things move around without explanation on their dresser, they hear a loud bang on their door 3 times. This freaked Christy out so much she jumped up out of bed and she said, "We have to go sleep in the spare room. I'm not sleeping in here." So they move all their stuff and they start sleeping in the spare room from that night forward. From that night on, as they slept in the spare bedroom, they would hear footsteps on the floor above them, seemingly walking around the bathroom, down the hallway, stomping at certain points. It was relentless, and neither of them were getting any sleep. So finally, Christy's husband said he was going to talk to his mother, who's a very spiritual person. And she came to the conclusion that this little girl, this imaginary friend he had when he was growing up, had attached herself to him and was getting jealous of Christy because this was his first long-term relationship. They weren't married at the time, but they were getting very, very serious. And his mother was convinced that this little girl had grown hostile toward Christy because she was taking up her space. She instructed Christy and her husband to smudge the house, wipe vinegar on the door frames and the window frames, to cleanse the space and acknowledge the spirit and tell it was not welcome, which they did. She says from that point forward, the activity stopped. Even their produce stopped rotting as fast as it had, and they had never experienced anything again in that house. I'm going to send Christy the link to this video so she can read the comments, but let us know if you've had an imaginary friend or if you think there's anything to that with the paranormal or the supernatural, or if it's just a figment of imagination like so many children think. I'm not supposed to talk about what happens at boarding school, so please keep me anonymous. This story came from someone we'll call Abby, and Abby says she was born and raised in Alaska and has always lived there until about 2 years ago when her parents shipped her off to boarding school in Montana. But Abby says she was not a good student. She was always getting into trouble, and so the day after Christmas of 2023, she got kicked out. And if you got kicked out of that boarding school, they sent you to something called wilderness therapy in Utah. Abby had heard some of the girls in her boarding school talk about wilderness therapy, but she just thought it was, hiking, camping, pooping in the woods. But she said she was excited to go. She wanted to get the hell out of Montana. And so when they came to pick her up, it was 3 a.m. and she was excited. She's like, let's do this. It was a 14-hour drive to the base. And when she got there, they took her height, weight, they took all of her vitals, gave her gear and said, get in the van. We got about an hour drive and it's 84 miles to the closest town. She says they drove her to the middle of bum F nowhere, and it was down a bumpy road. It was dark out, but up on the mountain she could see a light, and they said, that's the camp. That's where you're going to be staying. They get up there. They show her yurt, which she said is basically a giant tent which can sleep up to 5 people. She gets to bed, and in the morning she's greeted by the other 4 girls she's sharing this yurt with, as well as the 3 staff who were on duty, and these staff would rotate every 2 to 3 days. The first group of staff she's with is 3 women, and they teach her how to cook her food, how to stay warm, how to do everything she needed around camp. She said they were very nice, and she didn't think anything about where she was or the native land that they were staying on. But come that first Tuesday, the staff switched out, and a man and a woman come to camp. This pair of staff members were a little more wild. They were talking to these girls about all of the crazy things they experienced out in the wilderness. And Abby and her friends in the yurt just thought that they were kidding with them, trying to scare them. Abby said it did kind of scare her because her and another girl in the yurt were native, and they had heard of some of these creatures that these staff members were talking about in their elder legends, but they didn't want to give it too much thought. One night, she, her friend, and the female staff member all had to use the bathroom, so they had to walk along this path to go to the outhouse. She said the outhouse was a little ways away, but it was pitch black outside, and the only illumination was from the moon. So she, her friend, will call Emily, and then this female staff member that we'll call Stella are all walking down this path to the outhouse when all of a sudden Stella starts shushing the girls. The girls are looking at her like, what's going on? What's going on? And she says, keep your eyes down. Don't look up. So of course, both the girls look up, and about 8 feet behind them, they see a shadow figure walking down the path behind them. Abby screams, Emily screams, and Stella continues shushing them, say, don't pay it any attention. Keep your eyes down. Keep your eyes down. Stay calm. Stella's whispering to them, don't pay it any attention. If you don't pay it any attention, it can't hurt you. Keep your eyes on the ground. You cannot interact with them. If you ignore them, they'll go away. So the girls kept their eyes on the ground the entire walk back. When they got back, they told the other girls what they had seen. And Stella says, this happens all the time out here. You have to heed my warnings. Going to bed that night, Abby said she could not sleep at all. She kept hearing whispering outside the tent, even though all the girls were accounted for. There was a staff member in the tent who stayed up nights with them to make sure no one tried to escape or harm themselves. But the rest of the adult camp was about 5 minutes away. She said she heard whispering all night, but the staff member said they couldn't hear it, and it continued after that night. She barely got any sleep. A month later, she woke up in the middle of the night to hear something moving around the tent, and the other girls got up as well. It sounded like footsteps. They called for the other staff over the camera, and the staff said they couldn't hear anything, and it must just be snow falling off the yurt. She says it wasn't effing snow. There was somebody outside the tent that night. Another night, she woke up with intense pressure on her chest, but the worst came later. She had fallen back asleep but woken up again because the pressure on her chest was so much she couldn't bear it, and she heard a whisper. She said it sounded like a smoker who had smoked 20 cigarettes a day for 30 years. It whispered my name. She said it was raspy, it was real, it was right next to my head. The night staff again said that they didn't hear anything and just to go back to sleep. She said other things happened all the time. She wasn't the only one who experienced it. One night they were sitting around a fire and a girl started crying because she said, look at that shadow person standing next to the yurt. There was a boys' camp not far from theirs, and one night staff members were all called because the boys were complaining about hearing laughing outside the tent. When they did a head count, all the boys were in the tent. She says by far the scariest night was one night they were going to hike up a mountain to cook dinner on the mountain, and they climbed the mountain, they watched the sun go down, it was pitch black. They began to hike down, and it was so dark they had to hold on to each other's backpacks to get down the mountain. She said it was so dark you couldn't see 3 feet in front of you. There were 5 girls and 3 staff, but when they counted heads, there was a 9th body in the chain. She says they never found out who it was, and the staff just accepted this as something normal that happened all the time in the Utah wilderness. She said, I'm back home in Alaska now. I'm so happy to be out of there, but I think it's important to remind people that those are native lands and we weren't there first. She ended her email by saying, I swear this really happened. If you go out there, please remember to be respectful. I think there's a man that lives in the barn or in my woods. The thing is, I'm deaf and I can hear his voice. Oh my God. That was the subject line for an email that I received for Spooky Scary Storytime from someone named Sophia. And Sophia said she's 18 and she lives on this farm that her family purchased about 5 years ago. But the farm was built in the 40s and everyone in her family has always felt this kind of presence in the barn. Sophia said they have several head of livestock, all kinds of animals, and sometimes when she's in the barn, they'll all stop and stare in a certain spot. Other times when she walks in, they completely freeze. And she said they have chickens, they have roosters, and so to walk into a barn and seeing all of the animals frozen staring at you is very off-putting. Also interesting to note is she said her cats and her dogs will not go in the barn, which is strange because the dogs work the stock, but they'll stop right at the doorway and not follow the animals in. She said the really creepy thing started happening this summer after they moved in June. Some of the members of her family started hearing certain noises coming from the woods after dusk, like a cough or a voice in the distance that didn't belong to anybody in the family. Sometimes they would report seeing the silhouette of a man off in the distance, but they never saw it together. Little brother started hearing tapping at his window, but only at night, and anytime they checked, there was nobody there. But then he started having dreams of a man standing at his window, staring at him as he slept. Sophia said she has also had dreams of waking up, looking out the window of her bedroom, which is on the second story, and seeing a man standing in the yard looking up at the second story of the house. Although a lot of the members of her family were seeing this man in their dreams, they said that they all just chalked it up to groupthink. But Sophia got a cow, and she said he was a generally calm cow. Sometimes at night, he would seem unnecessarily spooked, and if she left the barn doors open while she was out there, he would just stare off in the distance with his ears pinned back. She said at times she's looked out to try to track his stare, and she'll see a silhouette moving around in the trees, but she's always thought it was just an animal. But anytime that happens, she calls or texts her dad, who will send her brother out, and they'll walk her back to the house so she's safe. She said for a while she was cleaning the cattle stalls out at night, and she would take the bucket from their stalls out to the back of the property to dump, but that ended abruptly one night when she looks and it had just snowed and she saw that there was a set of boot prints that had followed hers and ended abruptly. She said the prints had not been there when she had come out, okay? And she also says that they have a giant saint statue by the entrance of the barn, and one day they came out and found the saint statue had been moved about 20 feet and it was facing the house staring at them. Everybody in her family swore they didn't do it. She says none of this would have really been that bad had it not been for the voice, because one day she was out in the barn, she was doing some work, and she heard a very deep voice behind her say, "Hello?" This is when she talked about being extremely hard of hearing, and she said she does have hearing aids that help somewhat, but she doesn't wear them out in the barn because they can alter your perception of sound and how close something is, which can be dangerous when you're around large animals. When she hears this hello, she realizes that it must have been directly behind her, and she turns around and there's nobody there, so she calls out because she thinks maybe it's somebody in her family. But there's nobody there. She runs in the house. She sees everybody's boots are dry. Nobody else had been in the barn, so it doesn't make any sense. And she said it was too loud and too deep to have been an animal in the barn. It happened again, and she heard someone call the male version of her middle name. So say her middle name was Josephine, it would be like them calling her Joseph. She said the voice was so clear, this person must have been standing directly behind her because there's no way that she would have been able to hear it otherwise. She said it totally creeped her out, but she didn't say anything to anyone because she didn't want to make her younger siblings too afraid to go in the barn. Then, she says about 2 weeks ago, her mom and her were cleaning the barn, and while their barn is divided into two different sections with two different aisles, her vision's not completely obscured, so she can see everything that's going on in there. While Sophia is cleaning, her mom suddenly turns to her and says, "Are any of the animals loose? Because I just saw something crawling down the aisle over there." That aisle ends in a dead end. There would have been nowhere for anything to go, so they look over, there's no animals loose. She says while all of this is strange, she doesn't know if she's dealing with something supernatural or if maybe there's a person living in the forest around their house, because she said their property backs up to a nature reserve in rural Illinois. It can't be a neighbor because their property is remote enough that somebody would have had to drive in and they would have seen headlights if somebody were to come and drive onto their property. Property backs up to a national park about 2 miles away. So she said, "I'm just curious if anyone has had any experiences like this in the same area or if anybody knows how to make this person go away, because at this point I fully believe there's a person." I had a really creepy story coming today, and honestly, I kind of hate this story because it really did creep me out. But this person, Marcus, emailed, and he said the subject line was the quiet hours, right? And he said a couple years ago, he was working at this residential care facility as a caretaker. I'm not sure exactly what kind of people were living in this care facility, but he said there were 5 residents. And this care facility was built in a small town in this old Victorian manor. Like they had converted this old Victorian manor into this care facility. And he said it had huge archways. It had like creaky staircases. Even though some of the manor had been updated, most of the original architecture was still there. And he said he worked a lot of nights, and by midnight, all of the residents were always asleep. And he's pretty nocturnal anyway, so he didn't mind working nights. And his job was mostly just staying up, kind of making sure that nobody was up and out of bed and being there in case anyone actually needed him. He says this care facility was independently owned and there were no cameras, right? But they noticed that at night certain things would go missing, like the person would come to do mealtime in the morning and eggs would be missing, cartons of food would be missing, cans of soup would be missing. And then there were like towels and toiletries that would go missing. So they had the suspicion that somebody was getting out of bed and hoarding these supplies, which he said like there was plenty to go around. Nobody needed to hoard anything. I bring this up because this had been a concern at the time this story takes place. He said this was also concerning to them because some of these residents actually were under strict diets, so they didn't want anyone getting sick. There was a camera on the entry and exit, like the front door and the back door of this manor, so they knew nobody was coming and going, like whoever was taking this stuff had to be inside. Around the time that these food items start going missing, he starts noticing like tapping at night, and then he notices this sour smell coming through the vents. Called some plumbers in to check it out because they thought it was just old plumbing and they couldn't find an issue and they just brushed it off. They're like, well, it's just getting old, you're probably gonna have to replace it soon. But he said he clocked it because it would only happen at night, and he did work some days. So this one night he's there and it's around like 3 a.m. and he decides he's going to lay down on the couch in the lounge and just kind of like close his eyes for a little bit, which he said he was allowed to do. All the residents knew where he would be, right? So he had a flip phone at the time, and he said he put it on the little coffee table next to the couch. He said sometime later he woke up kind of abruptly because he thought he heard a noise, and his phone was charging right there on the coffee table. And he said the couch was facing the hallway, right? So he looks out in the hallway and he sees something dart across the archway. But he said it was on all fours and it ran across and he was like, well, it looked humanoid, right? But he was like, it was too small to be one of the residents. It almost looked like a child. He said it happened so fast right after he woke up that he thought he was seeing things. But anyway, he gets up, he goes over to check out, the hallway or whatever. There's nobody there. So he goes back to the couch. And as he sits back down on the couch, he looks over at his phone that's charging on the little coffee table, and he sees a hand coming out from behind the couch, like almost grabbing his phone. He said it was unnaturally thin with like grayish skin, and it had long nails, and it had just crept out a little bit from behind the couch, and it was reaching for his phone. He said he doesn't know what came over him, but he just reached forward and he grabbed the phone, and there was this kind of like tug of war between this hand, and he couldn't really see it at that point because it was back behind the couch, but he felt the strength behind it. And so they're having this like silent tug of war for the phone, and finally the hand just lets go and it just disappears back behind the couch. He pulls the couch away from the wall and he's looking behind it, and there's no sign of anybody. So he's like, am I going crazy? He gets up, he goes to check on all the residents. Everyone's asleep in their bed. So the next morning, his supervisor gets there to relieve him. He tells her what happened. She calls the maintenance man. He said at first, she said, oh, I think you're just tired. I think you've been working too many night shifts. But eventually, after he was persistent, like saying, like, I know what I saw, she believed him. So the maintenance man's checking out the house, seeing if there's any way that somebody can get in from outside, when he eventually goes up to the attic. And it was an unfinished attic that they used for storage, so nobody ever went up there. But when he got up there, they see there's piles of blankets. There's like empty cartons of food all over the place. There's a sour, damp smell up there. And behind one of the panels of insulation, they find this woman who had been living up there, like frogging. She had been living in the attic. There was apparently an old servant stairwell up to the attic that they never used, but apparently she had been slipping through a crack, like a little slit in the wall in that stairwell, coming down at night, grabbing food, grabbing toiletries, and going back up to the attic. He said they did not find evidence of another person in the house, but he suspects that there actually was someone else living in there because he did see 2 figures that night. I don't know. I just feel like frogging is like one of the creepiest things. Like the fact that somebody else is living in your house and you don't even know. Luckily, she was nonviolent. Luckily, she was, just a poor woman who needed a home. But I guess they did end up contacting social services and getting her some help. But still a creepy story, still unsettling. I don't know if I would want to be in a house that was so big that I didn't know who would be living there. Story is crazy. This came from a girl named M who wants to be mostly anonymous, but she said her father-in-law may not have even been human. And I don't know if this story deals with psychological issues or if it deals with like supernatural issues, but I'm just going to tell you what she said because it's crazy. Her father-in-law literally became obsessed with her. She has the feeling that he was possessed by something, but I think he was just like evil. Also, TikTok is really pushing lives right now. So if you click on this link and stay for 5 seconds, I get paid. And if you do the same thing, you can get paid. Every time I've done a live, it's been really, really fun. I want to do more in the future. Anyway, so she says that to start off, she has never been a really religious person. She believed in God, but like it wasn't something that she actively practiced until this all went down. To start off, we're going to call the father-in-law Phil. And I apologize. This is going to be a long video because there's a lot to unpack here. But Phil had a record, okay? Had a record because he had heard voices in the past that led him to believe that his wife was cheating on him. So he in turn stalked her, and said she used to just believe that he was mentally unstable and had mental issues until all this stuff happened. This all started in 2018 when M and her fiance were in college, and she was working part-time and they were living with her fiance's mom. Really had no money and no savings, but things at his mom's house got complicated, and so they had no other option than to move in with his dad, who lived about 45 minutes away in Ohio. She really didn't like his dad because she said something about him just always felt off to her, but she really had no other options. And she was like, okay, we're going to do this for 2 years. We're going to save up money and then we'll get our own place. Like, I've been through worse. But right before they move out of the mom's house, the mom pulls her aside and is like, you have to be wary of him. Like, he's dangerous. Mom was really religious and she tells her that he has a really bad soul, but Em thought it just had to do with what they had all been through in the past. So she's like, okay, I promise I'll be careful. She had no idea what she was in for moving into this man's house. She said she remembers saying to the mom, like, not even the devil could take me away from him, meaning her fiance, but she had no idea what she was in store for. So at first they move in and everything is fine. They were happy. The dad was happy. Em made an effort to get along with him the best she could, and when she couldn't, she just ignored him. So February of 2019, they decide they're going to get a puppy, and they adopt this puppy, but he had anxiety issues. He didn't like to be in the crate. Dog is like her baby. So one day they're going out and she explains all this to the dad, and she comes home and she finds the dog completely defeated in his kennel, and when he gets out he's limping. So she was furious because she's like, unless a ghost did it, literally his dad did something to my dog. So I was angry. That was kind of the turning point when things started getting really bad in the house. Like, from then on, they noticed there was like a rat and mouse infestation. They noticed like all the cereal boxes had like corners chewed off, and they brought this up to the dad and they were like, you know, you have a problem, you need to get an exterminator. And the dad was just like, okay, I'll take care of it. But he didn't really seem to mind living with like rats and mice. Then comes this horrible smell from the walls, which she said had to do with something with like rats getting their tails stuck together and then they're unable to move and they pass away in the walls. So it was just like a combination of unsanitary conditions living there, but the dad didn't want to take care of it. But then came the voices. So there were a couple times when like she was home alone with her fiance and they would hear each other's voices being called and like talked to. So one day she's upstairs on the 3rd floor of the house and she hears him talking on the 1st floor of the house. So he's calling her name. She comes out of the bathroom, goes downstairs. She's like, why'd you call my name? And he was like, why'd you stop talking? He's like, we weren't talking. I just heard you calling my name. And he was like, no, we were having a conversation and you just stopped responding. So she's like, no, I wasn't talking to you. So he just looks at her for a second and he's like, okay. He looked like he was kind of scared, but they just like brush it off. 2 weeks go by, they're about to have a date night. The dad isn't home. She's on the 3rd floor getting ready. The bathroom door is closed. She hears him from outside the bathroom door say, are you almost ready? She's like, yeah, give me 5 more minutes. I'll be out. And then his voice got deeper on the other side of the door and he said, I want to smell you. So she thought he was like just trying to scare her or be creepy. So she opens the door and he's not there. So she goes downstairs to like see where he's at. The car is gone. So she calls him and she's like, were you just trying to scare me? He's like, no, I just went to get gas before our date. She ended up waiting on the porch for him. He comes home. He obviously believes her, but she said, again, because neither of them were really religious, like they didn't know what to do, but that was really the first time they felt like something was actually in the house. She said over the next few months, the energy in the house seemed to like shift. Like they used to be happy, but every time they were in the house, they just felt like miserable or angry for no reason. And then one day, her fiance's dad comes home with this new woman he's dating, and she tried to be polite and like win her favor, but this woman was like questioning her right off the bat. She said she's not really a bubbly person as it is. Like she's more introverted and would rather hang out with her dog than most people. But this woman's questions were like off. Like she was questioning about the dad and she was just like, I don't like how you talk to him. Which is all pretty rich coming from this woman that she's literally never met before, but she just tries to brush it off and she's like, okay, well, hopefully, you know, they won't last longer, whatever. A couple weeks go by, she decides she's going to pick up scrapbooking as a hobby, and she would always do her scrapbooking in the dining room. And one day she was just home alone with her fiance's dad. She gets up, she has this picture printed out of her in high school. It's on the table, it's ready to be glued down. She gets up to go to the bathroom and she comes back and the picture is gone. And she hadn't seen the dad like come into the room at all. There was nowhere else for it to go. Like it just disappeared. It wasn't stuck between pages or anything. So she asked the dad, she's like, hey, did you see that photo? And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I haven't been in that room. And she's like, okay, I guess I'll just print another one out. But she said it did not sit right with her. And by 2020, there was all kinds of chaos in the house. Her and her fiance were not getting along. They were drifting apart. They were fighting all the time. And part of this, she said, had to do with the fact that his dad was constantly telling him like, you know, you're too young to be getting married and you're not good enough for her. And he was also telling her at the same time that she was the perfect woman. Okay, so keep that in mind. He's also telling her constantly that he like loves her when she's leaving the house and things like that. So she's just doesn't really know what's going on. But again, they're only living there for a short while. She's trying to make the best of it. One day, the dad decided he was going to redo one of his bathrooms, and her stepdad was a contractor. So she invites her stepdad over to help with the bathroom redo. But he left early and he calls her and he's like, I really didn't like how he was talking about you. And she's like, what do you mean? Apparently, her fiance's dad had told her stepdad that his son didn't deserve her, that he loved her, that she should be with him. Just all in all, like praising her up and down very aggressively, and it made her stepdad uncomfortable enough to the point where he left. She tells her fiance this, and her fiance's like, he's probably just trying to be nice, like sing your praises to your stepdad, like he probably just came about it wrong. But then the stepdad starts walking in on her when she's in the shower, not once, not twice, but 3 times in the same week. She would tell her fiance about it. Her fiance would confront his dad, and his dad would be like, oh, I didn't hear the water running, like the door doesn't lock, I didn't know she was in there. And it was like her fiance had blinders on. She said he could not see what his dad was doing to her. Shortly after that, her fiance is staying at his mom's one night, but she didn't want to leave the dog alone, and his mom was allergic to dogs, so she decided she was going to stay at the dad's house alone with the dog to make sure that the dad didn't hurt the dog. They're in the middle of the night and they're sleeping, and her dog starts barking aggressively, and she wakes up and she sees his dad standing over her. His face is 2 inches from her face, and he starts petting her hair, and she's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get out of my room. And he's like, oh, we thought you could use the company. And she's like, I don't know who we is. He was by himself. Following week, she gets home from work early and his girlfriend is there, and she looks upset. She's like, what happened? And she's like, oh, his dad cheated on me, blah blah blah. And she was like, that wasn't really a surprise to me because I had heard that he had cheated on all of his partners in the past. But then she starts accusing M of cheating with the dad, and she's like, what are you talking about? I'm not cheating with him. To that, his girlfriend's like, then why is your photo under his mattress? And she said she was absolutely stunned, absolutely speechless, because that explained the picture that went missing. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, well, just tell me it's true. Just admit it to my face. And she's like, it's not true. And she's like, really? Then explain this. And she pulls out her phone, her dad's. She starts showing her screenshots of all of these messages that were sent from her phone to her fiance's dad, admitting that she wanted him, that she was sleeping with him. And she's like, I don't know who sent those messages. I never sent those messages. And then she said, just to twist the knife, she sent those texts to all of her fiance's sisters. Sisters all confirm that they have heard their dad say that she had admitted that she was obsessed with him, that she couldn't stop thinking about him, that she wanted to be with him, that they were in a relationship of intimate nature. This obviously causes all kinds of issues in her relationship with her fiance. He made her feel like she was overreacting, like she was crazy. She said she felt completely alone. And she started becoming hyper aware of how his dad looked at her, like he would hover too close. He was always on her heels. Shortly after that, she wakes up one night on the 3rd floor where their room was. She said it was more of an attic loft, but she woke up because she had heard a creak coming into the room, and she looked in the doorway and she saw this massive creature standing in the doorway, and she looked at her phone. It was 3:33 in the morning, and she said that her gut said, it's here for me, and she just felt like she was looking at evil is the only way she can describe it. She said she can't describe its face because it's still traumatizing to her. She was completely paralyzed. She couldn't scream, so she just squeezed her eyes shut and then opened her eyes, and in the doorway was a single deflated balloon. Following morning, she woke up. She was like, I have to get out of this house. She starts packing up the car, and her father-in-law was outside doing some yard work, and she said that the way that his shadow was casting across the lawn was not his shadow. She knows what she saw. She said, I don't care if I sound crazy. It was not human. It had pointy features. It had horns. She said it had a beast-like stature, and she knows what she was looking at. She said it was not human. So she walks back in the house. She tells her fiance she's leaving, and her father-in-law walks in the house behind her, and he says, we need you to stay. She said at that point, her dog stepped in front of her and was doing the protective growling. So she ran upstairs to get the last of her stuff. She slammed the door shut behind her. And outside the door, she hears her fiance's voice. And he's calling her by her nickname, which was Love Butt. And he says, come on, Love Butt, come out of there. But something in her said it was not her fiance. And then she heard her own voice calling from outside the door. And it said, stop being such a scared little bee. She said he was shaking the door so hard that it was shaking on the hinges, and she said that she's calling the cops, and she heard him run down the stairs. She ended up calling her family, who came to get her later that day with 2 of her brothers, one of who is a trained fighter. They help her put all her bags in the car, and they drive off, and she said she turned to look back at the house, and she saw him smiling and waving at her from the window. She said, I've never been so scared in my life. I don't know what I was dealing with, but it did not feel like something of this world. It felt evil. It felt paranormal. Her and her fiance actually did stay together. They worked out their issues. They're married now. They've been in counseling. They're doing much better. Her fiance knows that she will never be in the same close proximity to his dad ever again. She said, I still don't know if it was the house that was haunted or if his energy created something evil inside of it. She said, I'm glad that we're doing better, but to this day, I have no idea what I was dealing with. So if anyone has any thoughts, that's what she's really looking for here. And that's why she wanted to share this story. But she did say that she still remembers what she said to her fiance's mom at the time, which was not even the devil could take him from me. And now she's more careful about what she says out loud. She's not going to be tagged, but let her know if you have thoughts. I'm going to send her the link to this story right after I post it. Some things in the mountains, you guys, you cannot convince me otherwise. This is a story time about something that was living in a treehouse outside of a cabin in Big Bear. And this story came from someone named Alexandra, who's going to be tagged if you have any questions. She said in 2010, she, her sister, her mom, her aunt, her cousin, and her grandmother all were going to take a big girls trip to Big Bear. They were all very excited, and they rented this cabin. I don't know what platform they used, but my guess is one of the shared property rental ones. Okay, so they pull up. As they're pulling up, the first thing that's unsettling about this cabin is they notice that there is a giant tree house in the tree very close to the actual cabin. And they pull up, it's all boarded up, so they're like, okay, well, it's probably just from whoever used to live here. They unload the car, they go inside. And as they were loading in the house, they noticed that they could hear like noises coming from this tree house. But because it's boarded up from the outside, they're like, okay, well, it's probably just an animal that got in. Don't think too much about it. But as they're in the cabin all night, they keep hearing this sound from outside. It sounds like it's coming from the treehouse, right? So that night, Alexandra, her sister, and her cousin are all sharing one bedroom. Her mom and her aunt were sharing another, and then her grandmother had her own bedroom. As you can imagine, the bedroom is a little bit cramped, so Alexandra is actually sleeping on an air mattress that's backed up against the door. She's about half asleep. I guess she was watching TV, and the door handle starts to turn, and so she turns to look at it, and she expects like her grandmother, her aunt, or her mom to come walking in, telling her to turn off the TV or something, but the door handle just stops, like nobody walks in. So she's just laying there looking at it, and then it starts to turn again. And then the door is pushed open about a third of the way, but nobody comes in. So she's like, Mom? And there's no answer. So she finally gets up. She looks out in the hallway. There's nobody in the hallway. So she peeks in her mom and her aunt's room and then her grandmother's room, and they're all asleep. She goes back in the bedroom where she's sleeping, and her sister and her cousin are also asleep. So she's like, weird. Kind of gave her the creeps. So she ends up just laying back down on the air mattress, pulling the covers over her head, putting her AirPods in, and passing out. That night, she dreams about a little girl with red hair and pigtails, wearing a long white dress with blue bows, running up and down the green staircase in their cabin. Okay, not that weird, kind of creepy, but she's just like, I'm in a new place, probably strange dream. So she wakes up in the morning and she tells her sister about this dream, and her sister's face like goes white. She's like, I literally dreamed the same thing. Did the little girl have freckles? And she's like, she did. She's like, I didn't even mention the freckles to her. They're like, cool, cool, cool. Same dream. How do you explain that? But they're determined to make the best of this trip, right? Because they're on a girls' trip and they're going to have fun. So that night they are in the hot tub and everybody's having a great time, and they start hearing noises again coming from the treehouse. And it's like pacing, like definitely two legs, pacing around. Sounds like somebody's walking up above them. Stomping, pacing, like someone is trying to be heard. So they just decide, you know what, screw this, we're going to go inside. So they all go in, they go to sleep. They're trying to sleep at least. And then they hear howling coming from the treehouse. She's like, I don't know what it was, but I've never been so happy to get home in my life, and I think that was haunted. I have always been sensitive to spirits, but I really think something was going on there. So I would love for people to tell me what they think, and like I said, she will be tagged, so let her know if you have thoughts or questions. I would love to hear your thoughts about if you think that there's something paranormal going on, if you think that these are just figments of the imagination. Either way, I always love to hear from you. All opinions are welcome as long as they don't bully anyone else. As always, thank you guys so much for listening. Thanks to everyone who has supported me so far, whether it's just with your attention or if you're a patron on Patreon. If you would like to become a member and help support the Spooky Scary mission, my Patreon is patreon.com/ashleeinc. I'll put that link right here for you. It's also in the description of this video for easier access. If you'd like to submit a story, you can do that on my website, dogoodstaybad.com/story submissions. I will put that link in the description as well. We also have merch on the website. We've got mugs, we've got hoodies. I've got some new shirts coming this week too, and they're really, really funny and really, really cute, I think. Yeah, as long as you guys like these stories, we will keep them coming. Let me know if there's a topic you want covered that I haven't covered yet. And if not, I will see you next time. And don't forget to like and subscribe this channel if you haven't already. I try to post a new video 2 or 3 times a week, and I post daily short form videos on all of my socials, which are Ashley Inc.